Hey guys, tonight we stumbled barefoot through a vineyard that doesn't exist on any map. The moon hangs low like a bleeding eye, and the grapes you crush underfoot aren't just ripe, they're bursting with memory, fermenting 1,000 years of whispered regrets and ecstatic screams. The air is thick with the scent of something sweet and dangerous. It's not just wine, it's the perfume of forgotten rites, the kind that leave you laughing one moment and crying the next. Somewhere in the dark, you hear music. Not the kind you stream. This is bone flute and drum skin stretched over ancient altars. And you, lucky you, are already too deep in to turn back. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I mean it. And if you're listening from somewhere strange, maybe it's 3 a.m. in Hanoi or twilight in Toronto, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing who else is awake with me. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up in the middle of nowhere, with grape skins on your tongue and a dull throb in your temples. Your hands are sticky. You don't remember drinking, at least not like that. There's ivy tangled in your hair, and your clothes are torn in a way that suggests either a bad rave or a very enthusiastic history lesson. The stars blink disapprovingly down at you, and somewhere behind your left shoulder, you swear you hear laughter. Not cruel, not kind, just knowing. The kind of laughter that's been echoing since the first fool tried to resist a god. You don't know it yet, but you've just survived a night in the presence of Dionysus. But let's rewind. Before the hangovers and hallucinations, before the masks and madness, there was a woman screaming as her belly ripped open with light. Semele, a mortal, had done the unthinkable. She'd gotten herself pregnant by Zeus, king of gods and unrepentant hornball. Hera, queen of marriage, long-suffering, and just so over Zeus's nonsense found out. And because this is Greek mythology, and not a parenting blog, she didn't go to therapy. She went to war. Disguised as a friend, Hera whispered venom in Semele's ear. Are you sure it was Zeus? He says he's a god, but anyone can throw thunder around if you squint. Semele, understandably rattled, asks Zeus to prove he's divine. And Zeus, the eternal show-off, agrees. He arrives in his full celestial glory, thunderbolts, radiance, the whole electric nightmare. It's beautiful. It's also fatal. Semele explodes. Just vaporizes into holy ash. The fetus inside her doesn't have time to react, but Zeus, being Zeus, plucks the unborn child from the fire and sews him into his own thigh. Yes, his thigh. We're barely 10 minutes into Dionysus' life, and already we've got spontaneous combustion and divine leg pregnancy. You probably won't survive this story, by the way. Just putting that out there. When Dionysus is finally born, again, it's not a clean slate. It's a restart soaked in trauma juice. The other gods are skeptical. Hera is outright hostile. And so begins the theme that will haunt Dionysus forever. Being too much and not enough at the same time. He's God and outsider, miracle and mistake, comfort and chaos. His birth is a warning label disguised as a miracle. As a baby, he's whisked. A way to avoid Hera's wrath. His guardians? Nymphs, forest spirits. And a few satyrs, creatures with goat legs, permanent boners, and zero respect for bedtime. Imagine growing up in a forest daycare run by horny drunks who think lullabies should include drum solos. That was Dionysus' childhood. There are stories of him giggling as vines curled out of the earth, wrapping around ankles, stealing goblets, turning water into wine. A toddler miracle, or a tiny menace. Historians still argue whether Dionysus was raised in Nysa, a mythical forest so secret no one agrees where it was, or if the stories were just metaphors for his emotional isolation. Either way, you don't come out of that kind of upbringing normal. The thing is, Dionysus didn't want to be normal. He was already dancing before he could walk, already seducing before he could speak, He learned early that pleasure was power. And when power hurts you first, when it kills your mother and makes you a fugitive, you don't wield it gently. You wield it like a thesis, a fennel stalk wrapped in ivy, topped with a pine cone, harmless looking, until it splits your skull. Now here's the sex story you didn't ask for but can't unhear. According to Sex with Kings, there's an ancient tale, possibly invented by later dramatists, of Dionysus seducing a mortal prince, not with words, but with dreams. Night after night, the prince sees Dionysus in his sleep, kissing him, tangling vines through his ribs, pulling his soul out one sigh at a time. When the prince finally wakes and meets Dionysus in real life, he throws himself at the god's feet, weeping with relief. They spend 3 days locked in a room, emerging only to demand more wine. Some scholars insist the tale is just a metaphor for conversion. Others suspect it was straight-up divine thirst-trapping. Either way, the dream seduction technique? Underrated. But it wasn't all divine romance. Dionysus was also a walking contradiction. He preached release, but sparked violence. He offered ecstasy, but demanded surrender. There's an obscure story fringe lore from Asia Minor of a village that refused to dance during one of his processions. Just wouldn't join in. The next day, every fig tree in the village bled red sap, and all their chickens laid eggs shaped like screaming faces. Coincidence? Local fungus? Divine tantrum? No one knows. But the villagers reportedly started jazz-handing whenever a stranger in a vine crown passed through after that. See, Dionysus isn't just the god of wine. He's the god of what wine does. He's blackout laughter and morning shame. He's the god of when you text your ex at 2:43 a.m. and when you delete it before they see. He's the sob in your throat during karaoke, the arms you wake up in but don't recognize. Dionysus is possession, not just demonic, emotional, sexual, revolutionary. And he doesn't knock before entering, which brings us back to you, lying in that vineyard. You taste iron and berries. You feel warmth in your stomach and dirt in your fingernails. You don't remember what you did last night, but you know you danced. You know you screamed. And if you really strain your memory, you think someone whispered your name like a prayer and a curse all at once. That's Dionysus. A god you don't believe in until he's already inside you. A god who demands that you break apart just to see if you can rebuild. A god who shows up not when you're ready, but when you're raw. In this was only the beginning. You're still lying in that vineyard, and your breath fogs faintly in the night air, even though it shouldn't be cold. The wind shifts, and suddenly the vines above you twitch not from wind, but from memory. They murmur names you've never heard, in voices that sound suspiciously like your own if you'd been drinking moonlight. You sit up slowly, and in the bruised silence that follows, you start to remember something, an origin story not your own, but one you've somehow lived through. Picture a womb not of flesh, but of fire. A child sown into the thunder gods. Thigh, gestating in a pocket of lightning until the day Zeus couldn't keep his leg closed any longer. Out popped Dionysus, sticky with divine afterbirth, eyes already too wide, too knowing. You'd think being born twice would earn you some sort of celestial diploma. Instead, it made him everyone's problem. The gods viewed him as an anomaly, a walking loophole. Hera, seething with maternal spite, still wasn't done trying to erase him. The Olympians, with their neatly labeled portfolios war, wisdom, marriage, thunder, didn't know where to file madness and Merlot. And the humans? Well, they were about to learn what happened when you ignored a god who only wanted you to dance. They say Dionysus wandered from place to place like a divine hitchhiker, always barefoot, always smiling like he knew the end of your favorite song before you even played it. He didn't have a tempo back then. He had a vibe. And that vibe was contagious. The nymphs who raised him knew better than to try and domesticate it. Instead, They passed him to the satyrs half-goat, full nuisance creatures who believed boundaries were myths and personal space was negotiable. These were his first followers. His frat house, if you will. They taught him how to laugh until you vomit, how to steal figs without getting caught, and how to play the pan flute in a way that made trees weep sap. Not everyone appreciated this education. Hera, ever the helicopter parent of Olympus, sent madness to chase him across continents. Real madness, not the fun kind. The kind that makes you forget your name, your shape, your place in the world. But Dionysus didn't break. He bent, shimmered, reassembled. He disappeared from Greece and turned up in Phrygia, in India, in Thrace. Everywhere he went, wine grew from the soil like it had been waiting for him. And where wine flows, truth follows whether you're ready or not. One town in Lydia tried to resist. A small king with a large ego told Dionysus to keep his nonsense moving. The king had laws. He had order. He had men in matching skirts with swords. What he didn't have was a clue. Dionysus, in a move both petty and poetic, didn't throw a single thunderbolt. Instead, he turned the king's mother and sisters into maenads, his possessed, ecstatic priestesses, and sent them into the hills. Within days, the king was found torn to pieces, smiling. Some say he deserved it. Others argue it was performance. Art. Historians still debate whether these myths were cautionary tales or ritual propaganda. What's not in doubt? Dionysus didn't lose sleep over it. And then, of course, there was Pentheus, Pentheus. Poster boy for bad decisions in the face of divine seduction. He was a Theban king with a jawline carved from disapproval and a moral compass stuck on no fun allowed. When Dionysus arrived in Thebes, inviting everyone to join in his rites, wine, dance, wildness, Pentheus scoffed. He banned the cult, declared Dionysus a fraud, threatened to arrest anyone who so much as hummed a drunken tune. And that's when things got spicy. Dionysus didn't confront him with thunder. He infiltrated, whispered, invited, seduced. One night, Pentheus finds himself oddly curious. Why are the women of his city sneaking off to the hills? What are they doing out there, half naked, covered in ivy, howling at the moon? Against all reason, he disguises himself in women's clothes, Dionysus' idea, of course, and creeps up to the mountains to spy. But Dionysus doesn't let voyeurs leave unpunished. He fills the maenads with divine frenzy. They see Pentheus, mistake him for a mountain lion, and do what maenads do best when they see something threatening. They rip him to pieces. The final twist? His mother, Agave, delivers the killing blow, cradling his severed head like a trophy. Until the madness lifts, and she realizes what she's done. You'd think this would end the cult. But no, it explodes, spreads. Dionysus becomes more than a party trick. He becomes the god who dismantles rigid power with lace and laughter. And here's your sex story. In one of his many pilgrimages eastward, Dionysus met a queen in India unnamed. Of course, as most women in old myths are unless they birth tragedy. She wasn't seduced with wine or poetry. She was seduced with silence. He spent 3 nights beside her, not touching her, not speaking, just being. She cracked first, whispered confessions, offered her kingdom, stripped herself of everything but vulnerability. On the 4th night, he kissed her once and left before sunrise. Her empire was never the same. Some say the union birthed a dynasty of ecstatic warrior priests. Others claim it was all symbolic. Foucault suggests such stories speak to the power dynamics of surrender, how true dominance is achieved not through force, but through the willingness to be undone. Either way, it made an impression. Dionysus wasn't just teaching people how to drink. He was teaching them how to let go of control, of shame, of the tidy illusions that keep civilization twitching in its straitjacket. And the gods? They were watching. Poseidon didn't care. too busy brooding underwater. Apollo raised an eyebrow but said nothing. But Hera? Still not over it. She sent titans to tear the boy god apart in some versions. In others, she simply waited, hoping that the mortals, drunk and delighted, would turn on him themselves. But the opposite happened. The more Dionysus offered release, the more people clung to him, not in obedience, but in worship. And not the boring kind with incense and robes. The dangerous kind. The kind that smells like sweat and feels like flight. There's a fringe theory circulated by a few bold classicists that Dionysus was originally a foreign god entirely, imported from Thrace or the Levant, slapped with a Greek name, and stitched into the pantheon only after his cult became too loud to ignore. If true, it would explain a lot. The outsider energy, the androgyny, the refusal to follow rules even the gods respected. But of course, mythology doesn't care about passports. Dionysus wasn't from somewhere. He happened to people. He still does. Back in your vineyard. A leaf lands on your chest, warm despite the wind. It smells like fermented sunlight. You realize the stars are moving now, not twinkling, but dancing. Drunk constellations spinning slowly around the sky. You blink, and for a moment, the grapevines look like arms. Arms that have held you before. Arms that are waiting. You're not scared. You're curious. Which, as anyone who's ever woken up in a toga can tell you, is the most dangerous emotion of all. Asterisk, the sky above you doesn't behave like a normal sky anymore. It swirls just slightly, like the whole dome of stars is circling some cosmic drain, and you begin to realize that you haven't just been remembering Dionysus, you've been following him. His scent still clings to your skin. Crushed myrrh, overripe figs, and something almost metallic. Something ancient. Something sharp. And just ahead of you, beyond the tangled curtain of vines, comes the sound of tiny bells. Delicate, insistent. Chaotic, you push forward through the thicket, barefoot and bleeding slightly, and emerge into a clearing filled with satyrs. Yes, those satyrs, half man, half goat, all party. Their fur is matted, their horns glint with some kind of gold dust. And their grins tell you they know things you don't. One of them winks. Another offers you a goblet made of something that definitely used to be alive. You don't ask what's inside, you drink. And just like that, you're pulled backward, downward, inward, into the wild cradle of Dionysus' adolescence. Imagine being raised by beings who laugh during thunderstorms, who treat nudity as casual as a shrug, and who think hangovers are personality traits. There were no bedtime stories, only midnight howls and sunrises watched while hanging upside down from tree limbs. This was the gods' daycare, the original forest preschool. And while other gods learned to wield lightning, wisdom, or justice, Dionysus learned the pulse of rhythm and the temperature of surrender. His lullabies were flute solos. His teachers were always just a little bit drunk. As he grew, so did his power. But Dionysus didn't train like a warrior, he wandered. And in wandering, he gathered. His following began to grow, not through conquest, but through charisma. Imagine someone walking into your village barefoot, with eyes like galaxies, offering not domination, but liberation. Not commandments, but catharsis. That was Dionysus' pitch. And it worked, especially on women. Particularly on the ones who'd been silenced, married off, tucked away behind respectable veils of obedience. These women became the Maenads, the raving ones. Not a great brand name, but they weren't trying to sell kombucha. They followed Dionysus into the wilderness, tore their veils off, and found themselves. Through rhythm, through movement, through drink, through screams. They weren't passive vessels, they were earthquakes in lace. It's easy to misunderstand the Maenads. Historians still argue whether they were actual priestesses performing sacred rites or just literary avatars of male anxiety about female autonomy. Either way, they weren't here to be cute. They were here to lose their minds on purpose and call it holy. One early Maenad tale, preserved in fragments and erotica-tinged commentaries, tells of a young noble woman named Thallo who joined the god in the hills for what was supposed to be one night of ritual. She stayed a decade. Her husband petitioned 3 different city-states for her return. None could produce her. When she finally came back naked except for ivy and scratches, she kissed her husband, handed him a grape, and walked straight into the sea. No one saw her again. Some say she drowned. Others say Dionysus made her into a dolphin. A few believe she simply reached a state of being that no longer needed cities or husbands. The story isn't a caution, it's a liturgy. You see, Dionysus offered something radical. Not escape from suffering, but a temporary death of the self. A place to shatter safely, to unravel without consequence. And while the Olympians sat in their cold marble thrones, demanding order and worship, Dionysus danced barefoot through the mess, whispering, "Come undone." And people did. They followed him by the hundreds, drawn to his rituals like moths to a particularly well-lit orgy. His parades were chaos. Think less Macy's Thanksgiving Day, more Cirque du Soleil meets Anxiety Dream. Picture masked. Figures holding torches, swaying in impossible sync, chanting names not taught in schools. The air thick with incense, sweat, and music. You'd walk for hours just to glimpse the god, and even a glimpse might melt your memory or rearrange your sense of time. That's not exaggeration. Ancient sources claim some worshippers aged backwards for a day. One poet claimed he heard vines speak to him in verse. A skeptic might call it psychosis. A believer might call it revelation. A Dionysian would ask why you're trying to separate the two. There's an obscure sexual fragment from The Erotic Spirit Through History that tells of a fisherman from the Cyclades who accidentally stumbled into one of these processions. He'd been out late, checking his nets, when he followed the sound of drumming into the woods. What he found wasn't just dancing, it was transformation. Women sprouting ivy from their wrists, men laughing while bleeding wine from their eyes. The fisherman stayed silent, afraid. But Dionysus found him, touched his lips. The man burst into uncontrollable laughter and ran into the sea, never to be seen again. Later, locals swore the fish in that bay began singing. Science says no. Myth says maybe. Dionysus says, who cares? What you have to understand is that Dionysus wasn't trying to build an empire. He was building a feeling. He didn't want temples, though he got them. He didn't demand loyalty, though people gave it freely. He wanted release, not as a side effect of ritual, but as the point. His rites weren't just celebrations. They were rehearsals for collapse. Society told you who to be. Dionysus asked who you were underneath that. Your answer didn't have to make sense. It had to be true. And that's why his followers terrified kings. You can tax a temple. You can regulate a god of law. But how do you control someone who teaches your citizens to feel too much? That's the danger of Dionysus, not the wine. The clarity that comes after it. And speaking of wine, here's a fun tidbit. Some fringe archaeobotanists believe that the early rituals of Dionysus involved a kind of proto-psychedelic wine fermented with herbs, mushrooms, even mild poisons. Not enough to kill, just enough to turn reality sideways. The drink was often prepared in silence, stirred in moonlight, and passed without words. Modern science might scoff. But some shrines contain goblets with chemical traces that don't match any known vintage. Were they tripping? Probably. Were they seeing gods? Maybe. Were those things different? That's the question Dionysus dares you to ask. And so you, standing now in the middle of this ecstatic procession you didn't know you joined, have to wonder, how much of yourself are you willing to lose to learn what's underneath? A satyr grabs your hand. The music rises. The stars blur. And just before you're swept into the spiral, you think you hear Dionysus whisper, not into your ear, but into your bones. everything real began as a hallucination. And then you're dancing. Your feet are bleeding, but you don't notice. Not yet. Not while the beat pulses through the solace of your feet like it's been waiting its whole life to meet your bones. You're not dancing anymore, you are the dance. The forest around you spins like a carousel on the verge of collapse. Every leaf, every shadow, every flickering flame is applauding you in some forgotten dialect of wind and sap. You glance down and see vines curling up your ankles like adoring hands. Someone throws a mask at you. You catch it without looking. It fits, and suddenly you're someone else, maybe everyone else. And just beyond the flames, waiting with the patience of myth, stands Dionysus, crowned in ivy and moonlight, eyes glittering with the kind of smile that says, "You've only just begun to break, because tonight you learn. There's no ecstasy without the risk of madness." And madness has a name, Dionysus. But before you spin completely out of yourself, the god gestures, and just like that, the music halts. A single staggering silence. It cracks the trance like a whip. You stumble, gasping, and suddenly remember. You have a body. You collapse near the base of an olive tree older than memory, and through the ringing in your ears, you begin to hear another story. The story of how Dionysus learned what it means to love in ruins. The story begins not with passion, but with panic. After escaping Hera's relentless spite, Dionysus wandered east, not metaphorically, but geographically. He went further than any of the Olympians had before him, through the forests of Phrygia, across Lydia, deep into the heart of India. Historians still argue whether these journeys were mythologized conquests or psychedelic trade routes. But the myth insists he didn't go to conquer, he went to share wine. Which, let's be honest, is a kind of conquest. And in those vast lands, he didn't just bring fermentation, he brought ritual. The locals called him a magician, a madman, a miracle. And he collected lovers like folk songs, each one unique, each one rewritten slightly with every retelling. But there was one he couldn't forget. Ariadne. Now, you've heard of her. Maybe not as clearly as you should have. She's often filed away in the myth drawer under ex-girlfriends of heroes. But Ariadne deserved better. She was a princess of Crete, daughter of King Minos, half-sister to the Minotaur, raised among labyrinths and secrets. And when she met Theseus, the Instagrammable hero who promised to kill her monstrous brother, she saw a way out. She gave him the thread that would lead him through the maze. She gave him her loyalty, her body, her escape plan. And in return, Theseus ditched her on an island while she was sleeping. Classic hero move. Imagine waking up to find your ship gone, your future canceled, your name forgotten before breakfast. That was Ariadne. And on that island, Naxos, she wept, cursed, probably screamed into the sea until the waves stopped bothering to answer. But then, as twilight bruised the horizon, she heard the sound of drums, faint at first, then closer, then everywhere. She didn't know it yet, but the god of misfits was coming for her. Dionysus found her still curled on the rocks, eyes raw, heart cracked open. And unlike Theseus, he didn't ask for anything. He knelt beside her and said nothing, just breathed, matched her pain with presence. And when she finally looked at him, she didn't see pity, she saw someone who understood. Someone born from tragedy, someone who turned loss into fuel. They say he crowned her with stars that night, literally lifted the circlet from his own head and placed it in the sky. We still call it Corona Borealis. Not bad for a rebound. Their love wasn't delicate, it was volcanic. It scorched, it healed. And in their union, Dionysus found something he hadn't realized he needed, proof that even broken things can shine. And here's where things get delicious. According to Sex with Kings, their honeymoon lasted 9 years. 9. Each year marked by a different kind of rite, a different procession, a different invention of intimacy. 1 year they never touched, only watched. Scholars argue whether these tales are symbolic, erotic exaggerations, or ancient tantric blueprints. But the message is the same. Theirs wasn't a romance. It was a religion. Now you'd think this would be the part of the story where they settle down. Maybe buy a cottage, raise a few satyrs. But Dionysus doesn't settle. He spins, and Ariadne spun with him for a while. Some say she died in childbirth. Others say she faded into divinity. A few whisper that she simply walked back into the sea one morning, smiling. But even in her absence, Dionysus carried her memory like a second heart. And maybe that's why. He started pushing harder, loving wilder, leading processions that blurred the line between grief and ecstasy. One account buried deep in the history of sexuality describes a secret ritual where Dionysus' priestesses would reenact his loss of Ariadne. The rites began with laughter and ended in weeping. No one spoke during or after. Participants weren't allowed to see each other's faces. And yet, many returned each year, craving that emotional whiplash. Because grief, when shared in rhythm, can feel like home. But not everyone thought so. Dionysus' growing influence made more than just temples nervous. It made rulers sweat. Remember Pentheus? He wasn't the only king who tried to ban the Bacchic. City after city passed laws limiting public intoxication, outlawing ecstatic dances, forbidding unauthorized divinations. In Thrace, one ruler went so far as to chop down every vine in the region. His people rebelled, not with swords, with song. They gathered in secret groves, pressed juice from wild berries, and danced in silence under starlight. Dionysus, moved by their devotion, supposedly turned their enemy into a fig tree. He bloomed every spring and bled sap, but resistance didn't always end in miracles. Sometimes it ended in madness. There's a lesser-known story, fringe, borderline suppressed, about a philosopher who attended one Dionysian rite just to study it. He stayed sober, took notes, asked questions. But when he tried to leave, he couldn't. His feet refused. His pen broke, his mouth filled with laughter that wasn't his. When he finally escaped 3 days later, he never wrote again. He just stared at vines and whispered, "I saw the god's real face." No one ever asked what it looked like. So you lying beneath that ancient olive tree, you wonder, what if the ritual never really ended? What if everyone who meets Dionysus gets a little haunted, not cursed, just aware? Aware that joy isn't safe, that ecstasy demands something in return. And the god doesn't take coin, he takes control and gives you back something messier, something truer, something like yourself but without the polite filters and pre-installed fears. That's the real miracle, not the wine, not the dancing, but the permission to be more than the version of you built to survive Monday mornings. Somewhere, the music starts again. Soft, reluctant, like a memory you're trying not to forget. And you realize the procession has already moved on. But the vines still twitch, the mask still fits. And Dionysus? He's waiting, just past the tree line, crown tilted, smile impossible, arms open. The only question is, will you follow? You do follow him. Of course you do. How could you not? It's not like you have much choice when the air itself feels drunk and the forest tilts to the rhythm of his steps. Dionysus doesn't walk, he glides, like someone who knows gravity is a negotiable rule. His bare feet barely disturb the undergrowth, but every flower he passes seems to bloom harder, glow brighter, as if trying to impress him. The satyrs giggle behind you, whispering in tongues no language teacher would approve, and the maenads are already ahead, spinning like storm clouds in silk. The deeper you go, the more the world begins to feel different, not magical, not even surreal, just honest. As though reality has finally stopped pretending to be sober. This is where the story sharpens. Because tonight isn't about the joy, It's about the price tag. You find yourself in a clearing shaped like a bold natural amphitheater or ancient wound. It's unclear. A stage rises in the middle, fashioned from vine-wrapped stone, and on it stands a man tied to a post. He's trembling, beautiful in the way statues are beautiful before they fall. And Dionysus, who was so playful just moments ago, now watches with a gaze that could bend mountains. This, you learn, is Pentheus. Pentheus, king of Thebes, Gogdanir, anti-party minister of the year. And right now, very much regretting his Yelp review of the Dionysian cult. Because this is the moment everything fractures. Let's rewind just a little. Pentheus, in all his rigid glory, declared Dionysus a fraud. A con artist peddling drunken chaos disguised as divinity. He had priests arrested, rituals banned, wine confiscated. He called the Maenads delusional. Called Dionysus a womanish trickster. Called the gods' followers unpatriotic. And Dionysus? He didn't get mad. He got theatrical. He disguised himself as a mortal priest and let himself be captured, quietly. He stood in Pentheus' court, calm as fermented tea, and let the king mock him. Then, very politely, he asked Pentheus if he'd like to see the forbidden rites for himself. To observe the Maenads in their natural, ecstatic habitat. Of course, Pentheus said yes. And of course, Dionysus dressed him in drag. It wasn't punishment. It was an invitation to surrender, to slip out of the king-shaped armor he wore, to experience something ungoverned. But Pentheus didn't understand the assignment. He went to spy, to judge. And he paid for it. The Maenads saw him lurking, mistook him for a predator, perhaps a lion, perhaps a man in power pretending not to be, and they tore him to pieces. Not metaphorically, literally. The worst part? His mother led the frenzy. Agave caught in the god's spell. Didn't recognize her son until she held his severed head, and the trance broke. By then, it was too late. Her scream, they say, could curdle wine. So back to the clearing. Back to the post. Pentheus isn't tied up for punishment. He's there for memory. Every time a new initiate joins Dionysus' path, the god makes them. Watch what happens when arrogance dances into mystery uninvited. It's not a threat. It's a warning. And a question. Will you listen? And here's the strange part. Dionysus doesn't gloat. He doesn't punish Pentheus with fire or snakes. He simply steps forward and touches the man's face, gentle as dusk. And Pentheus, already half mad, half awake, smiles. There's no hate in him. Just awe. As if even in death, he finally understands what he missed. The power of unmaking, the holiness of release. The unbearable joy of no longer pretending to be sane in a world that is n single quotes d dot, and then it fades. The clearing empties. The memory releases. And you find yourself back in motion, pulled along by the tide of the procession once more. Your feet move like they've always known this rhythm. Your hands mimic gestures you don't remember learning. And somewhere between the drums and the stars, you understand something vital. Dionysus isn't just the god of madness. He's the god of transformation, which brings us to your sex story. Buckle up, there's a lesser-known account in sex. With kings about a Thessalian prince named Midden who joined a Dionysian festival out of boredom. He wasn't a believer, just horny and curious. He wore a mask, drank the wine, danced a little. Then he met her. A Maenad with silver teeth and laughter like bells dropped in a cave. She didn't speak, just pulled him by the hand into a grove. And what happened next wasn't just sex, it was a rewrite. He came back different. Couldn't explain why. Just said that during climax, she bit his shoulder and whispered a name that wasn't his. And for a moment, he was that person. He felt memories that weren't his. Tasted languages he'd never spoken. Afterward, he shaved his head, burned his title, and wandered the countryside in a dress made of leaves, calling himself a priest of the god. His family disowned him, but years later, Pilgrims sought him for counsel, called him a prophet. A few said he glowed in the dark. You can call it possession, or self-discovery, or the world's weirdest coming-out story. But whatever it was, it changed him forever. And that's the thing with Dionysus. He doesn't leave you as he found you. He doesn't deal in polite transformations. He deals in molting, in exorcisms disguised as parties. He peels your identity off like a scab and asks what's underneath. Some can't handle it. Some run. But the ones who stay, they become something else. There's a scholarly debate, ongoing and heated, about whether Dionysus was ever meant to be part of the official Greek pantheon. Some academics argue he was smuggled in by popular demand, that his cult grew too big to ignore, and the Olympians had to make room or risk irrelevance. Others claim he was there all along, lurking in the margins, too strange to define, too necessary to discard. But all agree, he doesn't fit. He's the glitch in the system, the wild card in the divine deck. And that's precisely why people loved him, because in a world of rules and roles, Dionysus offered reversal. The king becomes a fool. The fool becomes a prophet. The virgin becomes a priestess. The boy becomes a god. He turns wine into blood and blood into revelation. He walks through gender like it's water. He breaks binaries like glass. And in his wake, he leaves not destruction, but honesty. So yes, the vines are still reaching for you. The mask is still glued to your face. The music is back louder. Now, a rolling tide of drums and howls. And you're not sure where you end and the god begins, but you're not afraid. You're curious, which means you're already halfway his curlin'. The music doesn't stop this time. It just deepens, thickens, turns into something you can't quite hear with your ears, but feel curling along your spine like the ghost of a melody you once loved and forgot. You try to speak, but your mouth is full of honey and ash. The trees lean in. The stars flicker like they're blinking. You realize now, you're not walking through a forest anymore. You're walking through a memory. Not yours, his. Dionysus is no longer ahead of you, but beside you. Not as a figure of myth, but as a pulse in the dark, a whisper behind your thoughts. A rhythm in your chest that doesn't match your heartbeat, but keeps you alive anyway. And now you're on a ship. Or what feels like a ship. The ground sways, the air stinks of salt and prophecy, and you're surrounded by men whose laughter is too loud, too sharp, like it's hiding something. Pirates, of course. Because this is the night Dionysus gets kidnapped. Yes, kidnapped. Which is objectively hilarious. A band of Tyrrhenian pirates, thinking they've scored themselves a wealthy foreign prince, lures Dionysus onto their boat. He doesn't resist. He even thanks them, which should have been clue number 1 that this was a bad idea. Clue number 2. The moment the ropes refuse to hold him, they slip off like wet spaghetti. Clue number 3. The instant the helmsman says, "I think we should put him back," and everyone ignores him. There's always that one guy, isn't there? The one who senses the horror movie unfolding, but gets talked over by the BROS. So the pirates set sail. And Dionysus just sits there, smiling, watching, waiting. The sea darkens, the sails groan, and then the miracle begins. Vines start to grow up the mast. Ivy and grape leaves, wrapping every plank like the ship is being swallowed by the gods' own body. The oars snap into snakes. Wine spills from the wood. Flutes play themselves. The pirates scream. One jumps into the water and turns into a dolphin mid-air. The rest follow. The helmsman, the only one who begged for mercy, is spared. Dionysus touches his head, blesses him, and disappears in a shimmer of stars and citrus. Just another Tuesday in divine prank warfare. This isn't just a fun myth. It's a masterclass in subversion. Dionysus doesn't punish with fire or storms. He embarrasses. He overwhelms with beauty. He makes the sea bloom and the deck whisper. He uses joy as a weapon. And that's the hook. That's what makes him terrifying. Because joy, when it comes without warning, can destroy your sense of control faster than any sword. Here's your sex story, and it's appropriately oceanic. A seafaring merchant, let's call him Orestes, joins a Dionysian rite by accident. His ship's docked. He hears music inland, follows it, ends up surrounded by maenads and masked strangers. Someone presses a cup into his hands. He drinks, blackout, wakes up on a beach 2 days later, with ivy tangled in his beard and the vague memory of being kissed by someone with eyes like tide pools. He sails home, but things are different. His wine turns better in the barrel. His customers swoon just hearing his voice. He sings while trading, and his rivals fall silent. Months later, he receives a letter from a woman who says she saw him glowing on the shore, offering blessings to the waves. He has no memory of this, but every full moon, he dreams of vines growing through his ribcage and wakes up with sea salt in his mouth. Was it a dream, possession, divine side effect? Foucault would say it blurs the boundaries between economic selfhood and erotic transformation. We say, Dionysus struck again, and here's your quirky tidbit. In some ancient cult variants, Dionysus wasn't just associated with wine and madness, he was linked to bees. Yes, bees, buzzing symbols of death, rebirth, and sweet chaos. Some rites involved honey-dripping altars. Others swore that the maenads could whisper to bees, guiding them like flying prayers. One fragment describes a priestess who wore a gown made entirely of wax and stingers. Another hints that Dionysus once wept golden tears that turned into honeycombs. Historians still debate whether these references were metaphorical or remnants of older agricultural worship traditions absorbed into his mythos. Either way, the god had a thing for things that sting and swarm. So you, back in your not-quite body, now stand at the bow of that long-sunken ship, watching stars swirl in the water below. You realize that Dionysus wasn't just playing with the pirates. He was performing, demonstrating. His divinity doesn't arrive with thunder. It unfolds like a magic trick that ends in transformation and existential dread. He's the god who walks into your life smiling and leaves you entirely changed. And you don't even realize until months later when you start laughing at funerals or crying at weddings, and you don't know why. It's no accident that Dionysus is the god of theater, because everything about him is spectacle. Not showy for the sake of ego, but for the sake of revelation. He uses costume to reveal truth. He wears masks to expose faces. His processions are theater, his rituals are improv. And every follower is both audience and actor. The stage, reality, the script, unwritten. The ending, always a little bit tragic and a little bit holy. And that brings us to the thesis, the most deceptively absurd weapon in mythology. Imagine a staff made of fennel, wrapped in ivy, and topped with a pinnacone. Harmless, right? Looks like something you'd find at a whimsical farmer's market. And yet, in Dionysus' hands, it becomes a symbol of unstoppable force. His maenads wield them too, and they've been known to tear through flesh and stone with it. How? No one knows. Maybe belief itself powers the thesis. Maybe ecstasy sharpens it. But the symbolism is clear. Joy is not weak. Femininity is not fragile. Dionysus turns softness into revolution. There's a fringe story, unconfirmed, but haunting, that tells of a village elder who mocked the god's procession. Said their thirsty were toys, called the maenads overgrown theater kids. That night his crops withered. The next day, vines had burst through his home's foundation. On the third day, he vanished. Locals say he was found years later in a neighboring town, wearing an ivy crown and leading a ritual in flawless meter. Didn't remember his name. Called himself Thyrosophoros, the one who bears the staff. So when you look down and see that you're holding a thesis, don't panic. Don't drop it. It's not a mistake. It means you're ready. Not to fight, to feel. To become something the world doesn't know how to label. Something unruly, sacred, alive. The music rises again, but this time it's not frantic. It's patient, like an invitation. And you realize that you're no longer just watching this story, you're part of it. The forest leans in. The stars blink approval. And Dionysus, wherever he is smiling. Because the night isn't over. It's just getting interesting. You wake up in a dress that isn't yours. Not a dress, really something between a robe and a declaration. Stitched from wine-stained linen and vines that refuse to stop growing. It clings to your body like it knows secrets about you that you haven't admitted even to yourself. You're barefoot, again, of course. There are feathers in your hair, bruises you don't remember earning, and your arms smell faintly of incense. And salt. A mirror appears, don't ask from where, and for a moment, you barely recognize the reflection. But then you do. And it's not bad. It's unsettling, yes, but beautiful in the way wildfires look from a distance. The kind of beautiful that gets you arrested or crowned. And standing beside you, adjusting his ivy crown like it's always slightly too large, is Dionysus. Except today, he's dressed in pearls, eyeliner, and something you're pretty sure is a leopard print tunic cinched with a golden snake. He looks like every gender, and no gender at once. He looks like glam rock reincarnated. He looks like revolution. And then he speaks, but not with words, with presence. He doesn't ask if you're ready. He makes you ready. Because tonight, you're going to learn about the weaponization of femininity. *C. The thing about Dionysus is, he doesn't just blur gender, he dances on its grave while throwing glitter. He's divine drag. He's masculine madness wrapped in eyeliner and velvet, and that terrifies the old gods, especially the ones who built their power on clean lines and hard edges. In a world where gods flex their muscles and throw lightning. To prove dominance, Dionysus arrives wearing earrings and handing out wine, and it works. People kneel for him, not because he demands it, but because he dismantles them with softness. He seduces authority into unraveling itself. Let's go. Way back to the first time Dionysus revealed himself in this form. It wasn't a costume, it was a revelation. He appeared before mortals not as the brawny son of Zeus, but as something else. Something wrapped in silk and shadow. Feminine, yes, but not submissive. Beautiful, but not delicate. Powerful, but not loud. This version of Dionysus didn't threaten you with fire. He offered you freedom. He invited you to question everything, starting with your own reflection. And here's the part that rattled the patriarchy. People listened. Women saw him and felt seen. Men saw him and felt unsettled. Those in power saw him and felt something they couldn't name. Because Dionysus didn't fit their categories. He was priest and priestess, lover and destroyer. He made them want to worship and weep, laugh and surrender. And the gods, those marble-cut action figures of Olympus, didn't know what to do with that. Apollo looked away, Ares scoffed. Hermes smirked but stayed silent. Hera sharpened her knives. But the mortals, they followed him. In heels and tunics and nothing at all. They painted their faces and danced through cities like gender never existed. Dionysus didn't erase masculinity or femininity. He offered something more dangerous. He suggested they were performances. And once you realize you're performing, you might start to improvise. There's a ritual described in fragments from the Dionysian mysteries, kind of initiation called the dressing. New acolytes would be stripped of their identity, literally and figuratively, then clothed in garb that matched neither their birth nor their station. A soldier might wear a gown. A widow might be crowned in laurels. A farmer might be smeared with gold and led through town as a living statue. The point wasn't to mock, it was to unlock. The ritual forced you to become something you weren't allowed to be. And in doing so, helped you discover what else was inside you. One legend tells of a warrior named Lycos who mocked these rites, called them shameful, called Dionysus a goddess with a beard. Then one night, during a festival, he drank a little too much wine, just enough to feel curious. He wandered into the woods, tripped over a root, and landed in a circle of masked dancers. They didn't speak. They didn't let him leave. For 3 days they dressed him in silks, painted his face, taught him to move differently. When he finally returned to his village, he never raised a sword again. Instead, he became a poet. His war stories turned into odes. He started growing grapes. Said the vines whispered forgiveness when he watered them. Some claim he was cursed. Others say he was finally free. Historians still argue whether this story was metaphor or propaganda. The vines don't care. And your sex story for tonight? Let's just say it's a performance worth remembering. A renowned actor from Athens known for tragic roles, even more tragic affairs, once served as the high priest of a Dionysian rite. Part of his initiation involved embodying the god on stage and off. He wore Dionysus garments for months, took a vow of ecstatic service, and one night, during a sacred play, he made love to another initiate mid-performance, not as himself, but as Dionysus. The crowd didn't stop him. They joined in. It became a kind of communal possession. The lines between actor and god blurred, then vanished. Afterward, no one spoke of it directly, but the actor retired immediately, said he'd met the real thing, said he couldn't pretend anymore. The script, apparently, had been replaced with something true. Now, here's your quirky tidbit. In some ancient illustrations, Dionysus is depicted with breasts. Not as a joke, not as a mistake, but as a deliberate embrace of multiplicity. These aren't hidden or stylized. They're front and center, framed by laurels, held in reverence. One statue from Hellenistic Asia Minor shows the god with a full beard, bare breasts, and a lion at his feet. Tourists often dismissed it as an artistic error until scholars started realizing it wasn't an error at all, it was a theological statement. Dionysus didn't transcend gender, he invited it in for a drink. So now you, in your borrowed dress and blooming staff, stand in front of a mirror that reflects possibilities, not limitations. You could be anyone, anything, and in that moment, you finally understand why power fears this god. Because once you've tasted this kind of freedom, the freedom to slip out of your assigned shape and into your desired self, you stop obeying the rules written by people who've never danced. You look to your left. A Maenad is fixing her crown. To your right, a satyr is trying on earrings. Dionysus stands before you, grinning. "Nice look," he says, not with his mouth, but with his gaze. You nod because suddenly you believe it. The drums begin again, slow and sultry. The procession moves forward. And you, with your thesis, your mask, your dangerously expanded understanding of self, walk among them, not as a visitor anymore, but as a disciple. At first, you think the road is paved in petals. Then you realize it's tongues. Not literal ones, maybe, but tongues of fire, of fabric, of desire, every color of impulse curling under your feet like an invitation you didn't realize you'd already accepted. The sky above you is no longer blue or black, it's wine red and pulsing, as if the heavens themselves have been drinking. You're walking beside beings that no longer pretend to be mortal. A woman with deer antlers hums a lullaby in reverse. A boy with ink for eyes laughs like a thunderclap in slow motion. And Dionysus? He's no longer just beside you. He's everywhere, in the leaves, in the air, in the grin you feel stretching across your face for no good reason, except that something inside you is finally impossibly free. This is not a journey anymore. This is a takeover, because now you're seeing it, the full shape of Dionysus wandering. Not a straight line, but a ripple, his path carved by desire and disruption. A route that stitches itself across continents and cultures like a drunken seam of gold. He didn't build cities, he built stories. He didn't conquer with armies, he conquered with invitations, seductions, challenges you didn't realize were challenges until your knees were on the floor and your heart had new priorities. His followers didn't just worship, they converted. Not to a faith, but to a feeling. Dionysus in his wandering gathers people the way the ocean gathers driftwood. The broken, the beautiful, the bored. They don't all look like priests. They don't all sound like prophets, but they carry him. In their hips, in their laughter, in the dreams that won't shut up. They are farmers and flute girls and philosophers who got too curious. They are lovers and lepers and liars who, one night, danced too close to something that felt like truth and never looked back. Asterisk, and among them, of course, were lovers. Dionysus loved generously. He wasn't exclusive. He didn't fall into the tidy patterns of Greek myth where men chased nymphs and women waited around to be rescued or ruined. He loved across gender, across mortal and divine, across logic and legality. His passion was political. Every embrace was a rebellion against a world obsessed with ownership. One of his mortal lovers, Applauding, was a Thracian youth with a laugh that could unstring lyres. Their love was reckless and rapturous. Applauding rode bulls, climbed trees too high, dared the sun to kiss him. And one day, the vine god's favorite tried to ride a bull sent by Selene, the moon goddess. The beast threw him. He died, and Dionysus wept. His tears watered the earth until a new plant grew from Applauding's grave, a grapevine. This wasn't just a love story. It was myth alchemy. Desire transmuted into wine. Mourning fermented into joy. And from then on, every glass raised in Dionysus' name contained a little bit of Applauding sweet. Wild and nearly fatal. Another tale barely whispered in more conservative texts tells of a shepherd girl who refused to kneel before any god. But Dionysus, she met him not as a deity, but as a stranger who shared her fire one cold night. They talked, shared bread. He offered her wine, she offered him her name. The next morning, she woke alone, but with vines growing from her wrists, and a voice that made birds change flight paths. She never married, never stayed put, became a myth in her own right. Some say she was the first mortal priestess to initiate others in secret, in a cave that hummed with forgotten songs. They called her the mouth of the god, and here's your sex story uniquely Roman this time. During the Republic's more decadent years, a senator's wife was rumored to be hosting private Dionysian feasts in their villa. Not illegal, exactly, just frowned upon. These weren't just wine tastings. They were all-night ceremonies with masked strangers, whispered prayers, and ecstatic unions in candlelight. One evening, her husband followed her, spied through the cracks, and what he saw broke something in him. Not because of the bodies or the rituals, but because he saw her laughing in a way she never did with him, whole, unapologetic, divine. He tried to shut it down. Sent guards, but the wine in the cellar turned to blood. The guards went mad. The senator lost his voice. The wife disappeared. Some say she joined the god's procession. Others say she became a vine that still grows, impossibly, through marble. Walls. This brings us to a fringe debate among scholars. Was Dionysus himself a walking cult? A personification of an older collective psychic urge that got crystallized into a divine shape? Some archaeologists argue that his earliest shrines predate Olympus by centuries, that his rites echo those of fertility gods from the Levant, from Mesopotamia, even from Neolithic cave art, that maybe Dionysus wasn't added to the pantheon. Maybe he survived it. Maybe he outlived it, asterisk, and maybe that's why he's still so hard to pin down. Unlike Zeus, who rules, or Ares, who fights, Dionysus shifts. He dissolves borders. He laughs when you try to define him. He's the god of paradoxes, of contradictions that make you ache because they're true. Pleasure that leads to tears. laughter that ends in collapse, rage that erupts into song. He is not the God you call for safety. He is the God you summon when you're ready to risk yourself for something real. And real, it turns out, is messy. So you, walking now through a path made of petals and tongues, realize you haven't spoken in hours. Or maybe days. Your voice isn't gone. It's just marinating. The thesis in your hand pulses with a quiet rhythm. Your feet no longer hurt. Either the pain's gone, or you've surrendered to it. And ahead, you see something enormous. Not a temple, not a throne, a gathering, a ritual. It's alive. Breathing. Waiting. The air tastes like promise. And just behind you, you feel his breath. Dionysus. Brushing past your shoulder, smiling not just at you, but through you. Because you are not just walking toward the right, you are becoming it. The sky has changed again. Not the color, but the texture. It's thicker now, like velvet soaked in honey, draped too close over your head, and humming softly with the anticipation of myth. You breathe it in and taste rosewater, sweat, and something floral that shouldn't. The intoxicating, but absolutely is. There's movement all around you, not chaotic, but deliberate. Like a stage being set behind a curtain that doesn't quite close. And right in the center of this rising tension stands a woman. No, not a woman. Not anymore. A former princess. A former victim. A newly crowned immortal. Her name falls into your mind like a stone into still water. Ariadne. And her story, oh, it hums in your bones before anyone even says a word. Because this isn't a story about being saved. This is about being chosen when you've already been thrown away. Let's rewind to her beginning, just long enough to set the stage. Ariadne, daughter of King Minos of Crete, half-sister to the Minotaur, was raised behind palace walls that echoed with lies and the groans of something monstrous in the basement. She knew her father's legacy was built on fear, that her mother had lain with a bull not because of desire, but because of a curse. And in the middle of all that madness, she learned to survive by smiling beautifully and asking dangerous questions. In quiet tones. When Theseus came young, smug, sharp-jawed, and hero-branded, she saw not a man, but a map out. She gave him the thread to navigate the labyrinth. She gave him her trust. Her body, her exile. And he gave her abandonment. Classic. He left her on Naxos sleeping. Didn't even bother with a note. And when Ariadne woke up, hair tangled, mouth dry, heart in splinters, she didn't scream. She didn't beg the gods for revenge. She just walked into the trees, into the sea, into herself. And there, exactly where every story assumes a woman must wilt, Dionysus found her. Or maybe she found him. Either way, he didn't arrive with thunder or promises. He came quietly, sat beside her, matched her silence, and something passed between them that didn't need translation. She didn't need a hero. She needed someone who saw her not as damaged, but divine. And Dionysus, god of outcasts, of beautiful chaos, knew exactly what that felt like. They didn't fall in love, they rose into it. Their union wasn't soft focus or sanitized. It was wild, animal, sacred. They danced before they kissed. They fought before they shared wine. They crowned each other with thorns and joy. And when he offered her the heavens, it wasn't metaphor. He took his own crown, a circlet of stars, and flung it into the sky. Corona Borealis, her name in constellation form. Still there. Still shining, and yet Ariadne didn't become some quiet goddess wife draped at the edge of his myth. She became part of the cult, not an accessory, a force. She was worshipped with him in rituals that screamed her name. She was painted on walls beside him, always in motion, always looking like she might laugh or bite or both. And some whispered that her divinity surpassed his, that Dionysus gave her power because he recognized it, not because he granted it. Now, here's your sex story, and it's both ridiculous and sublime. One Athenian playwright penned a comedy about a Dionysian priestess possessed by the spirit of Ariadne. She reportedly disrupted an entire performance by seducing half the cast mid-scene. When asked later what happened, she said she had no memory, only that her body had moved with purpose, and the audience applauded like they'd seen the gods themselves. The performance was banned. The priestess disappeared. Months later, the city held secret viewings of the play in wine cellars. It became a cult classic. Some say she returned, masked and nameless, to perform in every version. Others claim she never existed. But the story persists, because Ariadne never truly vanished. She multiplied. And here's your fringe tidbit. In some extremely obscure fragments, mostly pottery inscriptions and gossipy footnotes, Ariadne is described as she who unties, not just referring to the threat of the labyrinth, but to marriages, expectations, mental knots. She was invoked by women who wanted to leave their husbands, by slaves dreaming of escape, even by actors trying to break character. "Untie me, Ariadne," they'd whisper. Not as a curse, as a prayer. So now you, standing in this breathless clearing of ritual and velvet sky, watch as the figure of Ariadne rises, not in memory, but in presence. She's here, dancing, not for you, not for him, not for anyone. She dances because movement is how she speaks now. Her hips rewrite poetry. Her arms arc like vines in wind. And when she locks eyes with you, it's not flirtation, it's recognition. You don't know what she sees, but you hope it's something worth believing. In the circle forms again. You're not told to join, you're just pulled. The Maenads chant something old and sticky, a melody passed down from mouths too holy to lie. The satyrs keep rhythm with their hooves. And Dionysus? He plays the pan flute, not delicately, but with a kind of raw glee, like he's daring the melody to bite back. And Ariadne is still dancing. She never stops. Because the god may be the spark, but she is the flame. You close your eyes. The circle tightens, heat builds. And just as your body starts to forget gravity, there's a shift, not a sound, a sensation. The god has left the center, and you're in it now. You open your eyes and see everyone watching, not judging, just waiting, expectant, trusting. And for the first time, you realize you're not just part of the story, you're shaping it. You're standing in the center of the circle, and everything around you is vibrating, not metaphorically, but physically, audibly, electrically. It feels like the whole world is humming in the key of you, and for the briefest flicker of time, you glimpse it. Not the face of Dionysus, but the shape of the feeling that made him. A breath held too long. A scream that turns into laughter. A love so sharp it bruises before it blooms. And around you, the circle pulses not with attention, but with surrender. They've given you the floor, but not like an audience gives a stage. More like the sea gives a ship. And you don't have lines, you have instinct. And instinct says, move. Because this is the secret you're about to learn, maybe the most sacred one of all. Dionysus doesn't give you truth. He gives you space to find it yourself. And sometimes that means madness. Sometimes that means rapture. Sometimes it means something so raw it looks like collapse. But tonight, in this circle, in this hum of blood and drum, it means the Bacchic. You've heard the name before. Maybe in a theater class you didn't take seriously, or a footnote in some dusty book that smelled like regret. But the Bacchic Euripides final play isn't just a tragedy, it's a mirror, a warning, a spell disguised as drama. It tells the story of what happens when you try to outlaw ecstasy, when you arrest the divine because it doesn't show up in armor, when you call the gods' rites indecent and then secretly wish you were invited. The play centers on Pentheus, the Theban king we've already met, the one who mocked Dionysus, banned the rites, dressed up to spy, and got torn apart by his own mother. But in the play, there's no comedy, no wink, it's relentless. Dionysus is charming but terrifying. Pentheus is sympathetic but doomed. The Maenads are glorious and grotesque. And through it all pulses the same question: what happens when we try to cage joy? And now you're reenacting it, not as a performer, but as a vessel. The circle around you is the audience, and the chorus, and the cast all at once. The vines creeping up your arms are props in prophecy. The thesis you hold is not a symbol anymore, it's a key. And the mask you wear? It's starting to feel more like your real face than the one you walked in with. You take a step forward. The earth beneath you sighs. You open your mouth, and what comes out isn't speech, it's song. Wordless, primal, soaring. A sound that makes birds drop mid-flight just to listen. You don't know what you're singing, but they do. The Maenads begin to sway. The satyrs lower their heads. Dionysus is watching, but not leading. You are the ritual now, and through your own voice, you start to feel it, what it meant to be one of them. The Bacchic, not just dancers in the woods. Not just drunk women gone wild. They were a movement, a liberation, a storm in lace and flesh. They left their homes not to escape life, but to find it. They abandoned husbands, titles, even names, because the call of the god was louder than tradition. They were ridiculed, feared, but never forgotten. One of them, a priestess named Melite, appears in fragments across different sources. Some say she was a noble woman who became the god's favorite. Others say she was born in a vineyard and weaned on fermented milk. In one erotic account from the erotic spirit through history, she led rites so intense that even satyrs blushed. It said she once danced for 6 nights straight without food, drink, or pause, until her feet bled wine and her laughter cracked stone. Men followed her, begging to understand her secret. She'd lean in and whisper, "You must lose everything," and then vanish. But here's the twist: many of the Bacchic were not mad. Not in the way their enemies claimed. They were lucid, joyful, in control. The madness was a costume, a shield, a ritual lens. It allowed them to see through the crust of civilization into something molten beneath. And once you've seen that, you can't go back to dinner parties and polite discontent. This is why the cult of Dionysus wasn't just a religion. It was a disruption, a pressure valve. And in times of political tension, it surged. Historians still argue whether the rise of the Bacchic was a reaction to patriarchal control, economic anxiety, or just human need for chaos, probably all three. But the result was the same: processions of people howling with joy, tearing through villages, leaving behind a trail of broken amphorae and strangely healed hearts. And that scared the hell out of the authorities. You see, Dionysus didn't just offer wine and dance. He offered people a chance to feel, really feel. Not just pleasure, but grief, rage, liberation. His rites included mourning as well as ecstasy. Followers cried until they laughed until they wept. They saw visions. They confessed things they didn't know they were hiding. They screamed names that hadn't been spoken in generations. And when they returned to the cities, if they returned, they were different. Softer, stranger, braver. Some left altogether. Lived in caves. Became oracles, hermits, madwomen, saints. And then of course the men in charge tried to stop it. In Thebes, in Corinth, in even Athens, laws were passed. Rites were limited to daylight hours, wine was rationed. Masks were banned, but it never worked. The Bacchic didn't need permission. They didn't need temples. They had fields, groves, each other. The cult survived by moving, shifting, hiding in plain sight. And when it couldn't hide, it danced louder. There's a rumor, never confirmed, that the Roman Empire once sent a squad of soldiers to infiltrate a Bacchic rite near Neapolis. Only one soldier returned. He wouldn't speak for years. When he finally did, all he said was, "They smiled while breaking." He lived the rest of his life as a beekeeper. Never touched a weapon again. So here you are, breaking in front of an audience that only cheers louder the more you unravel. You drop your thesis. You tear your mask. You kneel. And in doing so, you rise. The circle surges forward, not to crush you, but to carry you. Hands lift you. Voices join yours. The forest leans in. The stars applaud. And through it all, Dionysus just watches, proud, silent, because he knows you've become the thing they all feared. A Bacchic. And you're only getting started. You don't know when your body stopped being your own and started being a ritual. Sight. But now every breath you take feels choreographed by something ancient. Your veins pulse like drum beats, and when you close your eyes, you can still see her melite, or maybe someone like her eyes smeared with ashes, thesis dripping. Wine, mouth open in a scream that could be grief or ecstasy or both. Around you, the circle doesn't close, it ripples. These rites, you begin to realize, aren't about containment. They're about rupture. And in this suspended moment, where your skin forgets to be skin and remembers it used to be stardust, you hear a new sound, a rustle like silk tearing underwater, and then a low hum, not human, not musical, but charged like the air before lightning strikes. Dionysus is coming again. Not as a god this time, but as an idea with teeth. He appears not in front of you, but behind your thoughts, and with him comes another revelation. Ecstasy isn't always joyous. Sometimes it's horror. And tonight, you're going to witness both. Because the Maenads are no longer dancing. They're hunting. The transformation is subtle at first. A flicker in the eyes. A tightening of the jaw, but then it builds. The music shifts from celebratory to something primal. A rhythm born from the earth's own heartbeat. They move through the trees now, like wind with a purpose. Hands reaching, lips chanting, not with joy, but with hunger. You want to turn away. You want to say this isn't what you came for. But then you remember you didn't come here. You were called. And you're about to understand why the gods never give without taking. This is the part they don't paint. On vases. The part you won't find in family-friendly translations. The frenzy wasn't just dance and delight. It was release, yes, but sometimes that meant releasing something dangerous. Something sharp. The Maenads weren't just celebrants. They were stormfronts in human form. And when provoked or merely possessed, they could tear a living being apart with their bare hands and believe they were doing it in worship. The story of Orpheus lingers in the background here like a ghost that refuses to settle. You know Orpheus, the musician who charmed Hades, who looked back at the wrong moment and lost Eurydice forever. What most forget is how he died. After failing to recover his beloved, Orpheus wandered north, swearing off women, immersing himself. In sorrow, the Maenads found him. Maybe they thought his rejection of love was sacrilege. Maybe his music reminded them too much of the pain they had danced to forget. Maybe they just saw someone broken and wanted to see what was inside. They tore him limb from limb. His head floated downriver, still singing. His lyre, they say, plays. Alone under moonlight, historians still argue whether this myth was a metaphor for the danger of rejecting ecstasy, or a warning that even the most beautiful things can be devoured by the divine. Either way, the lesson remains. To worship Dionysus is to flirt with obliteration. You see it now. A deer, innocent, blinking, caught in the circle. The Maenads move like liquid around it. There's no malice, just purpose. The deer doesn't run. It seems almost entranced. Then a cry splits the night high, sharp and inhuman, and the ritual begins. They do not stab. They do not slice. They unmake. The tearing is choreographed, almost tender, like they're freeing the spirit from its cage of bone. The deer dies, and the vines bloom brighter. The ground soaks it in. No one cries. No one cheers. They simply breathe, deeper than before, like they've opened a door and walked through it. You understand now, this isn't brutality, it's intimacy. This isn't violence, it's a negotiation with mortality. The Maenads don't kill to destroy. They kill to remind themselves they are still tethered to flesh, that their ecstasy hasn't yet floated them entirely out of the world. And now. Your sex story, although to call it just that feels like underselling it. There's an account in Peter Webb's Erotic Spirit Through History of a Bacchic rite in Thessaly where two lovers, a woman named Dione and a man named Thales, were chosen to enact the divine union of Dionysus and a mortal. They weren't priests, just participants. But that night, as the rite reached its peak, they were crowned with ivy, robed in gold-threaded garments, and brought to the center of the circle. In full view of everyone, they embraced not with shame, but reverence. Every movement became liturgy. Every moan, a hymn. Afterward, they weren't the same. Dione claimed she could hear roots singing. Thales became a sculptor who worked only in living wood. They never married, they never parted. And in old age, they disappeared during a thunderstorm while tending their vineyard. The wine from that region, centuries later, still has a faint taste of wild thyme and salt. This, too, was Dionysus, that not just the tearing, not just the dance, but the sacred merging of flesh and flame. The permission to embody the divine, not in temples, but in touch. And while modern minds may wince at the publicness, the rawness, the vulnerability of these rites, for those inside the circle, there was no shame. There was only the God. And here's your odd detail of the night. In some fringe variations of the Dionysian cult, especially in the back hills of Macedonia, participants believed that after enough rites, they could speak with animals. Not symbolically, literally. Snakes would whisper truths. Wolves would share dreams. One woman claimed she learned the language of bees. She wore nothing but honeycomb and would walk into hives unharmed. The locals called her the Hive Bride. When she died, her grave was never found. But every year on her death anniversary, the honey in the village tasted like grapes. So you, now trembling with the echoes of what you've witnessed, feel a new kind of silence falling. Not the absence of sound, but the fullness of it. The kind that comes after a climax so complete, even the gods pause to catch their breath. The Maenads return to softness. The satyrs gather offerings. Dionysus appears once more, not as storm, not as seducer, but as something gentler. He lifts a hand, and a new mask is placed in yours. This one is blank, smooth, waiting. He doesn't say what it means. He doesn't have to. It means choice. It means you've passed through frenzy, through blood, through passion, through performance. Now you decide who you'll be next. You hold the mask in your hands, and it stares back at you, featureless, impossibly smooth, like a thought yet to be born. You trace its surface with your fingers and realize something unsettling. It's warm. Not like stone left in the sun, but warm the way breath is. It's alive. Or maybe you are, and you've just never noticed how vividly your skin can feel until. Now, around you, the circle disperses not from exhaustion, but from evolution. The Maenads stretch like cats in moonlight. The satyrs toss grapes to one another and snort laughter through their wine-soaked beards. The forest exhales. And in that lull, a different rhythm emerges, not frenzied, not primal, elegant, precise. Someone is setting the stage again, and this time the scene won't be a wild hunt or a divine union. It's something more calculated, more public. Because now, Dionysus will show you how he built an empire from shadows and laughter. Tonight, you learn how a god of wine created the theater. The mask in your hand is no longer blank. It's shifting subtly, as if sculpted by your thoughts. A grin starts to emerge, then melts into a sob, then resolves into a tragic mouth open in eternal surprise. You blink, and it's blank again. Dionysus, now lounging across a fallen log like a cat with too many secrets, raises one eyebrow at you. And with no words at all, you understand the assignment. Step into the mask, and the world will become your stage. It begins in Athens, city of democracy, philosophers, and a deeply unhealthy obsession with olive oil. The city where minds sharpened like daggers and ideas strutted in togas. And nestled among its temples and taverns, the theater of Dionysus, the very heart of dramatic culture. Every year, the citizens gathered for the Dionysia, a festival that began with a drunken procession and ended with masterpieces that still echo through history. Tragedy, comedy, satyr plays, masks, music, ritual, catharsis, all for Dionysus. Because theater wasn't entertainment. It was worship. They built altars in the orchestra pit, sacrificed animals before the chorus sang. The actors wore thick-soled shoes and towering masks not for style, but to transform body and soul. And through them, Dionysus spoke, sometimes as a drunken fool, sometimes as a mourning hero, always as the truth slipping through fictions. Carefully stitched seams. You see, Dionysus didn't invent acting. He invented permission. Permission to pretend so deeply you discover something real. Permission to laugh so hard you cry. To cry so honestly you laugh. He didn't just bless the stage, he was the stage. Every line spoken, every gesture made, every gasp from the audience was part of the rite. To watch was to worship. To perform was to surrender. Athenian citizens, tough men with calloused hands and stern brows, would weep openly at tragedies. Grown soldiers would cheer at comedies featuring giant phalluses and talking frogs. Because in Dionysus theater, masks weren't lies, they were keys. And behind every performance was a question too dangerous to ask in daylight. What if asterisk you're not who you think you are asterisk? One particular playwright, Euripides, yes, him again, understood this on a bone-deep level. His plays were less drama and more psychoanalysis. In the Bacchic, he didn't just retell the myth. He dared the audience to sympathize with the god, to see the madness not as punishment, but as proof that breaking apart was necessary to become whole. Dionysus in that play isn't gentle. He's terrifying, righteous, but also tender, seductive. Every word he speaks is a dance between love and annihilation. Audiences left those performances shaking, uncertain, spiritually hungover. Which, of course, meant it was working. And now your sex story. Oh, it's theatrical. One famed tragedian, known only as Leonidas the Masked, was said to have been so devoted to Dionysus that he refused to ever remove his stage mask, even offstage. He lived behind the face of Pentheus for years, sleeping in costume, eating in shadows. One night, during the private rite, a woman in the audience climbed onto the stage mid-performance and kissed him. It wasn't planned, it wasn't staged. But Leonidas didn't break character. They made love right there, beneath the torches and laurel smoke, as the chorus chanted lines from Euripides. Afterward, she disappeared. He claims she was a Maenad, or the god himself, no one's sure. But Leonidas retired that year. His mask, cracked from the heat of the torches, still hangs in a forgotten temple outside Thebes. Lips forever parted in ecstasy or agony, no one's certain which. And your fringe tidbit, there was a small, short-lived theater cult in Delphi that believed the plays performed at Dionysian festivals were actually coded prophecies. They would replay comedies backwards, dissect lines for hidden names. One group claimed to predict earthquakes based on how many times the chorus repeated certain refrains. Were they right? Probably not. But they felt something real in those words, something sacred hidden in the farce. And that's the thing about Dionysus, he hides truth in the absurd. Now back to you. The mask is still in your hand. The forest has become a theater. The audience is everywhere, satyrs perched in branches, Maenads reclining on roots, stars blinking in expectant patterns above. You don't remember choosing to speak, but your mouth opens. And from it pours not a monologue, but a memory, your own. Dressed in metaphor, it's not polished. It's not prepared, but it's yours. The moment when you broke and no one noticed. The time you danced alone and pretended you weren't. The joy you buried so deep it grew roots. You tell it like a tragedy, but they laugh. You tell it like a comedy, but they cry. Because in Dionysus theater, genre is just another costume. The only thing that matters is the pulse beneath it. Asterisk, and suddenly, you understand why this god never asked for temples of stone. Why his rites spilled into fields and stages and bedrooms and dreams. Because he didn't want monuments. He wanted mirrors. He wanted you to look at yourself and see not the roles you were assigned, but the possibilities you abandoned. So as the play ends, because every story ends, even in the sacred woods, the mask in your hand turns cold. The vines retreat. The stage unbuilds itself. The audience doesn't applaud. They nod. As if to say, now you know. And Dionysus, seated where the prompter would be in any mortal theater, gives you a wink. Not of approval. Not of farewell. Just a reminder. The next act is yours. You hear the law before you see it. It rides in on boot heels and bronze, loud with righteousness, sharp with paranoia. It doesn't hum like the cult songs. It clatters. Unsubtle. The kind of sound that wants to replace belief with compliance. The bacchanalia have grown too loud, too many, too joyous. And joy, in the empire, is only safe when it's taxable. You're standing at the edge of a courtyard now, pressed into shadows as Roman censors read aloud a decree. They speak of excessive assemblies, of moral corruption, of foreign rituals undermining the republic. They don't say the name Bacchus, but everyone hears it. It trembles between the lines like a forbidden melody. The gods may be many, but only one has ever made Rome flinch like this. The law passes. The bacchanalia are officially illegal, asterisk, but something in you doesn't flinch, not anymore. Because you've already seen what happens when people try to suppress this god. You've walked his labyrinth, danced in his rites. You've held the thesis in your hands while the sky tore itself open. You know what Rome doesn't? You can't ban ecstasy. You can only push it underground. And underground. It thrives. The suppression wasn't surgical. It was hysterical. They didn't just close temples. They hunted priests, burned scrolls, interrogated citizens who sang too loudly or wore ivy crowns out of season. Over 7,000 people were reportedly investigated in the first sweep. It wasn't about belief. It was about order. The Bacchic rites weren't just spiritual. They were socially volatile. They let women speak in tongues, slaves touch gods, and men kiss each other without consequences. To the Senate, that looked like rebellion. To the followers, it looked like freedom. And freedom, once tasted, doesn't untaste. The cult changed shape. No more massive orgies in the woods. Now, smaller cells. Whispered meetings. Vineyards doubling as sanctuaries. Private homes where the wine was poured in odd patterns and laughter came too quickly for propriety. Masks became subtler. The thesis looked more like walking sticks. The hymns got hidden in lullabies. Every rule turned into theater. The persecution, ironically, became its own initiation rite. You learn of one such group in Capua, wealthy women, and a few ex-gladiators who met weekly under the guise of a wine-tasting society. They prayed to Bacchus while swirling their goblets, recited fragments of plays as gospel. They'd pretend to lose at dice just to whisper invocations during forfeits. Every toast was a coded prayer. Their wine was stored not in amphorae, but in urns disguised as funeral vessels. When questioned, they quoted Virgil. When left alone, they sang, "Here's your sex story sharpened by surveillance." In a Roman suburb, a senator's wife hosted ladies' evenings that were in truth Bacchic rites practiced through poetry. The women composed verses that doubled as erotic oaths. One night, a poem between two participants became so intense that the audience stopped reciting and simply watched. What followed wasn't scandalous, it was sacred. A ritual of touch, of mirrored movement, of slow undressing while the others held the final lines in their mouths like lit incense. Afterward, no one applauded. They knelt. And in that silence, Bacchus arrived not as a roar, but as breath. That senator's wife was later accused of atheism. She disappeared before trial. Her poems were found in a wine jar buried under her villa's hearth, each stained with purple ink and pressed with dried thyme. Scholars argue whether they were code or just love. The cult says, what's the difference? And here's your curious tidbit. After the crackdown, some Bacchic rites disguised themselves as medical retreats. Wealthy Romans believed in therapeutic rituals, so the cult leaned in. Followers opened health sanctuaries on the edges of cities. There, people would arrive under the pretense of curing melancholy or infertility. They'd be bathed in wine, massaged with oils infused with fennel and myrrh, then diagnosed in chants and riddles. A few left cured. A few stayed as devotees. One Roman general, suffering from hallucinations, came seeking clarity. He left with a new name and never returned to war. His legion called it madness. The cult called it awakening. The thing is, Bacchus didn't lose power in the shadows. He became more intimate, more deliberate. A god less shouted and more whispered. He taught his followers to survive oppression, not by resisting it head-on, but by slipping around it. Adapting, becoming ungovernable not through arms, but through ecstasy. If Jupiter was the empire's spine, Bacchus was its nervous system, unseen, electric, vital, and while the laws thundered above, the vines grew thicker below. Some modern historians still argue over whether the Senate overreacted. Maybe the cult really was just parties. Maybe they were conspiring. Maybe the truth lies in the fact that something could be both. A party that's also a protest. A kiss that's also a declaration. A dance that's also a demand to feel something in a world that teaches you to go numb. So what happens to you now, masked again, drifting between the public square and the private right? You move quietly. You learn the signals. You read faces, not for approval, but for recognition. You find the baker who needs dough in patterns older than Rome. The actor whose script always includes a line that doesn't quite rhyme. The widow who plants her rosemary in spirals. All of them part of the network. None of them say the name out loud. They don't have to, because Bacchus never needed statues or temples or laws. He just needed your pulse, and that can't be. Outlawed. The wine is colder now. Not chilled, but restrained. It no longer floods the cup, it waits, poised on the rim, like a thought not yet spoken. You sit in a darkened room, somewhere between a Roman bathhouse and a forgotten cellar, and you're not alone. They arrive in pairs and trios, wearing cloaks with hoods just deep enough to hide recognition, but shallow enough to suggest conspiracy. No one speaks until the first cup is passed. Not poured past. That's the cue. A single sip, then 2 fingers pressed to the lips. You've entered a ritual, not a party. And tonight, the Bacchic cult uncoils like a riddle wrapped in velvet, silk, and smoke. Welcome to the secret societies of Dionysus. Because when a god goes underground, he doesn't die. He diversifies the air in these hidden temples sometimes. Disguised as wine shops, sometimes as theater back rooms, tastes different, faintly herbal, faintly metallic. Like crushed time and memory. There are no altars here, no roaring fires. Only low torches, ink-stained walls, and layers of coded speech. Everything has a double meaning. The vine grows wild this season, means the rites are moving again. The grapes were sweeter last year, means someone's been arrested. You learn the phrases, you learn the signs. A hand left open at a feast means welcome. A closed fist during prayer means watch your tongue. This isn't theater anymore. This is espionage, but with more sequins, because now you're meeting the true architects of Dionysian survival. The spies, the artists, the seducers. The ones who turned worship into theater and theater into camouflage. The ones who understood that the fastest way to preserve a dangerous idea is to make it look harmless. So they wrapped ecstasy in etiquette, rebellion in rhythm, and sedition in satin. The Roman Empire thought they'd killed the Bacchanalia. What they really did was force it to evolve, and among these followers were initiates of a new kind. Women who'd been married off too young and found themselves suddenly fluent in ancient hymns they'd never been taught. Veterans who'd seen too much and started humming songs no soldier should know. Men with soft voices and sharp eyes who walked into temples disguised as couriers and left wearing wreaths that no one could explain. The cult had stopped asking for loyalty. It now demanded transformation. That each cell was different. One group near Neapolis read the rites like choreography. Every movement had a meaning, every gesture a spell. Another near Aquileia used poetry as prayer. Their verses passed in brothels and taverns like erotic scripture. One sect deep in the woods near Lake Nemi worshipped a statue that changed gender depending on the phase of the moon. Historians have tried to map these variations, but they always fall short because the rites weren't preserved in scrolls. They were preserved in bodies, in breath, in bruises hidden under silk. Here's your sex story smuggled between the margins of history. A temple dancer named Livia, exiled from the city for refusing an arranged marriage, became a high priestess in the hills. Her rites were invitation only. No masks, no names. Participants would strip themselves of jewelry, rank, and expectation. Then Livia would anoint each with oil infused with wine, honey, and opium. What followed wasn't orgy. It was something quieter, slower, a communion of touch, of breath, of vulnerability so disarming it passed for madness to outsiders. The Roman governor who raided the site left empty-handed. His men refused to testify. When converted, Livia vanished shortly after. But years later, a marble tablet was found near the ruins. Its inscription read, "To the God who unmade me and let me bloom." And here's your fringe detail. In some cells, initiates were trained not just in the rites, but in counter-surveillance. Dionysian followers learned how to speak in contradictory statements, how to confuse magistrates, how to wear masks so convincingly their own families didn't recognize them. They didn't just dance for the god. They performed for the state. One Roman historian, whose name we won't dignify, claimed the cult practiced ritualized forgetfulness, erasing personal history in favor of ecstatic rebirth. He meant it as an insult. The cult took it as branding. Because Dionysus didn't ask his followers to remember. He asked them to feel. And so they did. In darkness, in disguise, in plain sight. One rite involved blindfolds and mirrors. Another required fasting followed by indulgence so extreme the body couldn't distinguish pain from pleasure. A few involved silence so deep it echoed. All of them centered on the same principle. Ecstasy isn't given, it's made. And that kind of spiritual intimacy, the kind that blurs the line between person and God, terrified the empire far more than swords ever could. You sit now, in that cellar-turned temple, watching the next initiate be anointed. They tremble not from fear, but from proximity. Dionysus is here again, not as a figure or a whisper, but as heat rising through the floor. You hear laughter too loud, too long, and recognize it not as mockery, but release. The god loves laughter. Not because it's light, but because it cracks things open. And cracked things? They're easier to fill with wine. There's a story half myth, half manifesto of a scribe named Marcius who infiltrated a Bacchic group to expose them. He attended 6 rites, took copious notes, tried to remain untouched. But on the 7th night, he laughed for the first time in years, and that was it. The laughter was his undoing. He burned his scrolls, took a vow of silence, became their record keeper, not by choice, but by necessity. He wrote in wine, in ashes, in codes so poetic that historians still argue whether they're literature or liturgy, which brings us back to you, because tonight you're not just a witness. You've memorized the signs. You've tasted the wine. You've laughed too loud. And now the others turn toward you, not with expectation, but with invitation. There's a cup in their hands, not ornate, just full. It's offered without ceremony. You take it. It tastes like everything you've lost, and everything you're about to find. There's something strange in the way the world sounds after you drink from a cup that's older than your bloodline. It's not louder, it's clearer. Like the hum that's always been there finally turned up the volume. You hear your heartbeat and realize it has rhythm. You blink and the torchlight folds itself into patterns, ivy spirals, goat prints, ancient sigils you recognize without knowing why. The air thickens, not with smoke but intention. Every breath you take feels like it could trigger a revelation. You've crossed the threshold. The rites aren't around you anymore. They're inside you. And just when you think you're about to be left to your own unraveling, Dionysus appears again, not as a god, but as a mirror. He doesn't speak. He stares, and then he tilts his head almost amused, and you understand. It's time to fight, not with weapons, with feeling. Because tonight, you learn the thing Roman senators feared most. The reason the cult was hunted, silenced, slandered. Dionysus didn't just teach people to feel. He taught them to resist. See, most gods teach obedience. They want temples, tributes, sacrifices. Dionysus teaches defiance. Not with slogans or swords, but with surrender to joy, to grief, to the sacred madness that cracks the facade of civilization and lets the light in. Where other gods demand order, Dionysus thrives in chaos. Not chaos for chaos' sake, but for truths. Because nothing reveals the soul faster than ecstasy. And that made him dangerous. Because when people dance until they forget their own names, they forget what else they were told to be. When they wear masks, they remember they've been wearing invisible ones all their lives. When they touch, cry, moan, howl in sacred spaces, they begin to question why those things are forbidden elsewhere. Dionysus didn't offer escapism. He offered radical selfhood. And the state, any state, doesn't survive when people stop performing. That's why his cult attracted the oppressed. Slaves found in him a god who didn't care about status. Women found a god who didn't silence them. Queer people found someone who blurred gender not for shock but for worship. Even the sick, the poor, the misfit philosophers, they followed him not out of superstition, but recognition. Because in Dionysus they saw not a god above them, but a god beside them, laughing, dancing, daring them to drop the mask and see what happened next. In a society where masculinity meant stoicism and power meant silence, Dionysus burst in wearing perfume and a grin that said, "Feel something, coward." He cried openly. He seduced deliberately. He made emotion not a liability, but a weapon. And when enough people use that kind of weapon, even empires start to tremble. There's a quote in a near-lost treatise attributed to a Roman exile. The followers of Bacchus do not arm themselves with blades, but with truths too large for our books. That same writer was arrested for hosting illegal rites in his home. They never found him. Just his thesis, left leaning against a statue of Jupiter, mockery or blessing. No one could say, "And now, your sex story." This one's insurgent. A minor Roman official, let's call him Gallus, was assigned to infiltrate a suspected Bacchic cell. He pretended to be a convert, sat through their rites, feigned rapture, until one night, he didn't have to fake it anymore. It happened during a rite that honored the union of Dionysus and resistance, itself personified in some fringe rituals, as a blindfolded figure draped in chains. Gallus was chosen to embody the god. Another participant, anonymous, by design played the captive. Their movements began with theater. They ended in fevered communion. Afterward, Gallus cried. Not because he was ashamed, but because he hadn't realized how numb he'd been. He abandoned his post, fled, was never caught. His name was stricken from the rolls. But a century later, a small temple ruin was found in Gaul, inscribed with a simple phrase in Latin, asterisk, I served a lie until I danced. Asterisk, and here's your odd tidbit one, that sends certain historians into absolute meltdown. In several unearthed Bacchic shrines, small bronze plaques were found etched with what seemed to be fragments of laws. But not imperial laws alternate. Laws, no one shall worship in silence. The truth is in the trembling. Hierarchy ends where the thesis begins. Were they satire, sacred parody, a dream of another world? We don't know. But the existence of these rebellious commandments suggests the rites weren't just spiritual, they were philosophical. They imagined a different way to exist. And for that, they were hunted, because Dionysus, for all his softness, was a threat. To hard power, you can ban rituals, you can burn temples, but you can't unteach someone how to feel. You can't rechain a soul that's already tasted the wine of freedom. And Dionysus didn't just uncork the bottle. He made sure it overflowed. And so here you are, sitting on the floor of a secret room that could be anywhere, in Rome, in Alexandria, in the back room of a pub where history wears a cheap disguise. You've just passed through a rite so intimate, your heart's still echoing with it. And Dionysus leans in close, not to whisper, but to listen. He doesn't ask for worship. He doesn't demand loyalty. He just waits. And into that silence, you speak the thing you haven't said aloud until now. I'm not going back. Not to the world where you had to pretend. Not to the numbness. Not to the performance of strength, of calm, of control. You're not interested in applause anymore. You want the mess. The wine-stained truth. The beauty of being wildly, dangerously, exquisitely yourself. Dionysus doesn't smile. He grins. The torchlight flares. The others rise. No one says goodbye. That's not how this works. You've joined something that doesn't need permanence to have meaning. The rites will move again. The wine will spill again. The thesis will be passed to someone else. And when they ask what it means, you'll tell them, not with words, with feeling. Because tonight, you didn't just witness resistance, you became it. The candlelight flickers in rhythm with your pulse. And for the first time in what feels like lifetimes, you don't recoil from the dark, you welcome it. There's something honest about shadows. They don't lie about what they are. The world around you has grown quieter, not because the rites are over, but because the riot has moved inward. The city above your head thrums with order-marching feet, tax scrolls, iron gates. But down here, beneath the floorboards of history, the god still breathes. You can feel him in the cellar's stone, in the way the wine refuses to age properly, in the priestess who speaks 3 languages with her hips alone. And tonight, we aren't in Rome. We're far north, deep in the folds of Christian Europe, where the crosses are fresh, and the old gods are learning how to hide. Welcome to the medieval monastery cellars and sanctuaries, stacked atop one another. Like cautionary tales, and yes, Dionysus is here too, in robes, in riddles, in chalices filled to the brim with sacramental wine that tastes just a little too good for self-denial. The church may have tried to exorcise him, to recast him, as excess incarnate, a relic of pagan depravity. But Bacchus isn't the kind of god you bury in sermons. He just changes costume. So when the monks begin fermenting wine, not just as trade, but as devotion, when they whisper about visions after their 3rd cup, when they grow vines in the cloisters, and chant Latin hymns that sound suspiciously like Maenad songs slowed to Gregorian pace, you realize the truth. Dionysus didn't vanish. He infiltrated. One story passed quietly through a Carthusian abbey in the Alps speaks of Brother Albinus, a scribe known for beautiful calligraphy and extremely suspicious laughter. He kept his own wine cask, called it the Word, and refused to let anyone else touch it. Visitors claimed to see strange figures in the corner of his study, women in veils, men with animal eyes, masked children dripping honey. When he died, his journals were sealed by the church, labeled heresy in verse. Centuries later, when a section was finally translated, it read, "The god came in the fog, he kissed my cup. I forgot the rules." Because even when repackaged, the old thrill remained. Wine was communion, yes, but not always with who the bishops imagined. A few brave souls knew it, and some didn't even hide. One vineyard in southern France, now forgotten, then infamous, was operated by nuns who claimed to grow grapes in a sacred spiral. Their rites were quiet. No orgies, no thesis. Just a song sung at midnight, barefoot harvests, and a prayer whispered while pressing. The wine made there was rumored to cause dreams that always included ivy and gold eyes. The church shut it down, claimed a mold outbreak. No one ever found the vines again, but the best hiding places aren't always rural. Dionysus found sanctuary in art. You walk now through the manuscript room of a Benedictine monastery, where a young monk illustrates the margins of holy texts with faces just a little too wild. Hidden among angels and apostles are creatures with goat legs, women dancing with open mouths, chalices overfilled and spilling onto the page. You ask him softly who they are. He doesn't answer, just taps the ink pot and says, "The god knows how to sneak in." That's the thing about Dionysus. He doesn't need to be center stage. He just needs a crack, a loophole, a sip of wine served too warmly, a laugh that escapes in the wrong place. And medieval Europe, with its paradoxes, chastity enforced. Alongside drunken feast days, sacred relics paraded beside theater troupes, gave him plenty of space to linger. And here's your sex story, pulled from a confessional too poetic to be fiction. A nun named Theodora, gifted in medicine, began secretly treating village women for ailments, both physical and romantic. Her salves always smelled faintly of myrtle and ferment. One woman, a merchant's wife, claimed Theodora cured her barrenness, not through prayer, but through touch guided by vision. She spoke of being anointed under moonlight, of hearing voices that told her to dance, of hands that never groped but awakened. The woman conceived within a month. The child was born with a birthmark shaped like a grape leaf. The church investigated. Theodora was exiled. The child became a midwife who delivered half the region. She always wore green. And your oddity of the evening? There's a medieval German recipe for saint's wine, found in the notes of a monk alchemist named Otto the Gentle. The ingredients include crushed rose hips, elderflower, blackcurrant, and something listed only as tears of the god. Some argue this was a poetic term for morning dew. Others believe it referred to a hallucinogenic resin traded through obscure Moorish roots. Either way, drinkers reported visions of a man crowned with ivy dancing beside fire. Otto was never canonized, but he has his own feast day in certain forgotten valleys. You wander the cloisters now, trailing fingers over stone worn smooth by. Centuries of monks pacing and whispering, and occasionally giggling after dark. You hear a hymn slow, solemn, and layered beneath it, a second melody. One the choir doesn't sing with their mouths, but with their bodies. A tapping foot, a swaying head, rhythm leaking into ritual. Bacchus stashed inside the psalm's dot, and then there's the play. Yes, even here, in the most pious corners of Christendom, theater survived. Mystery plays, morality tales, performed by monks and clerics in robes with stage directions copied from ancient texts. Some were straightforward, the Passion, the Saints. Lives, others were strange. One performed in secret, the Sorrow of Silenus, told the tale of a satyr too old to serve Dionysus, who tried to join a monastery. He failed, of course he drank too much, kissed the wrong novices, and couldn't stop turning communion wine into actual nectar. But in the end, the monks didn't kill him. They danced with him. The play ended with Silenus asleep under the altar, smiling. The church banned it the following year. But the script was copied and shared. That's how the god survives, not through conquest, but through corruption of silence, of sanctity, of systems too brittle to bend. Dionysus doesn't demand a place in your temple. He sneaks into the margins of your manuscript. He lets himself be painted on ceilings, mistaken for saints. He sits in your chalice, disguised as tradition, and waits for someone thirsty enough to taste. And you? You feel the weight of it now, the layered centuries, the hidden altars, the laughter that lives under even the most solemn chants. You're not in a temple anymore. You're in a world where the divine slip through cracks, wearing borrowed robes, and still manage to throw a party. The torchlight dims, the cellar grows quiet, and somewhere in the monastery above, a monk pours another glass, hums a tune that doesn't belong in any hymnal, and raises a toast to no one except the God who never left. The oil paint glistens weightly under candlelight. You lean in closer, trying to understand how something so still can feel like it's breathing. The figure on the canvas smirks, not politely, but knowingly, as if he's been watching you for hours. His hair is tangled with ivy. His robe clings to one shoulder, slipping like a secret. And his eyes, oh those eyes, they follow you, not with judgment, but with invitation. You've seen him before. Not this exact painting, but the expression, the posture, the quiet arrogance of a god who knows you'll return. You're standing in a Florentine gallery, but make no mistake, this is still his temple. Dionysus has returned again. This time, through beauty. Welcome to the Renaissance. The church has the cathedrals. The kings have their coin. But Dionysus? He slipped into the hands of the artists. His thesis becomes a paintbrush. His altar, a canvas. His hymns are written in ink and marble and scandal. And the old god, reborn in layers of color and form, is smirking from the shadows of the most prestigious studios in Europe. You might expect him to arrive flamboyantly. Instead, he creeps in through subtle lines. A curved hip on a saint, a vineyard in the background of the Annunciation, a shepherd with eyes too wild for Christian modesty. But sometimes he comes right out and announces himself like in Caravaggio's Bacchus. That teenage boy, reclining with fruit and flushed cheeks, his wine just on the edge of spilling. That's not just a model, that's temptation incarnate. That's Dionysus as hunger. Art historians debate endlessly. Was it allegory? Was it indulgence? Some say it was just mannerist flair. But you know better. You've seen that look before. It's the same look the god gave you the first time you danced until your bones forgot your name. But this isn't just about painting. It's about reinvention. Because while the Renaissance is busy resurrecting Roman grandeur, the forgotten rites of Bacchus are whispering behind every fresco and sonnet. Think of Botticelli's Primavera, with its strange garden of eternal spring. Look closely. Flora dances barefoot. Mercury gestures like a conductor of wind. And near the center, a man half-wreathed in vine leaves looks up not at heaven, but at her. That's not just a seasonal allegory. That's a lost ritual painted in metaphor. And the artists know it. They may work under patronage, but they play for other gods. Michelangelo hides pagan bodies under Christian halos. Leonardo sketches faces that could belong to prophets or to maenads, depending on the tilt of the viewer's desire. Even Raphael, golden boy of papal favor, places half-naked youths in the margins, drinking, draped in ivy, always watching. And the poets? They're even bolder. In taverns and salons, they recite odes to pleasure that carry the weight of prayer. They quote Plato while eyeing each other's mouths. They read Horace under the table and toast to Bacchus with lips still stained purple. The educated elite claim it's nostalgia. You know, it's worship. Here's your sex story, brushed in oil and whispered in scandal. A painter's apprentice. In Venice, known for his ability to capture skin that looked warm to the touch, was hired to create a private portrait of a sleeping Bacchic for a minor noblewoman. The subject? Her cousin, a woman of such unshakable poise that even cardinals complimented her posture. The sessions were supposed to be brief, but over weeks, as layers of fabric came off and layers of paint went on, something shifted. The painter stopped pretending, so did she. The final piece shows her asleep, yes, but with a smirk, one hand cupping grapes, the other resting where no viewer could ignore. The noble woman claimed she burned it, but decades later, a nearly identical painting turned up in a convent, the name etched on the back, property of Dionysus. And your oddity of the night, in one northern Italian vineyard, a family claimed their vines only bore fruit when painted. Literally, they held an annual. Right where artists were invited to daub the trunks with colored wax, sketch eyes on leaves, even sing while pruning. The grapes from this harvest were said to taste dreamier, with notes of fig and memory. No scientific proof exists, but the practice survived 3 wars and at least 1 plague. The vineyard's logo still features a smiling face hidden in a swirl of ivy. Now here's the thing no one tells you about the Renaissance. It wasn't just about rebirth. It was about longing. A longing so intense it made men build cathedrals and paint angels with the thighs of wrestlers. A hunger that reached for the divine not with hymns, but with desire. Dionysus understood that hunger. He was that hunger. And in an age obsessed with balancing beauty and control, he offered imbalance as liberation. So you, now drifting through this gallery-turned sanctuary, start to see him everywhere. Not just in paintings, but in architecture that curves like a lover's back, in fountains that spill a little too suggestively, in songs that rise just above what's appropriate. You see him in the blush on a bishop's cheek, in the tilt of a sculptor's hand, in the way a model holds her breath for just a second, longer than modesty allows. Dionysus didn't disappear during the Renaissance. He wore better clothes, and when the church noticed, they flinched again. Not publicly. Publicly they praised the art, but privately they muttered. Some works were censored, others accidentally lost. Painters accused of heresy were suddenly remembered as geniuses after they died. And yet, the cult persisted. Not as underground rituals this time, but as symbols, codes, touches of gold leaf that shimmered like invitations. One young nobleman wrote in his diary, "Today, I posed for a figure who will be Bacchus." The painter said, "Do not smile like a god. Smile like a man who has met him." I understood instantly. That nobleman later joined a monastery. They say he still paints vines in the margins of every psalm. Because the god doesn't care what title you wear. He only asks, do you remember how to feel? So you stand before the painting one last time. The smirking boy, the flushed fruit, the spill that's always just about to happen. And you smile, not politely, not knowingly, but like someone who's seen him again. And knows the next party's already begun. You hear the bass drop before you see the lights. Not the kind of bass that rattles your ribcage, but the kind that sneaks up your spine and asks, politely, if it can rearrange your nervous system. And of course, you say yes. The room pulses low and slow, like a heartbeat dreaming of thunder. Neon veins streak across walls that don't know if they're a club, a warehouse, or the inside of your skull. And they're mid-spin on a fog-drenched dance floor is a figure crowned not in gold, not in ivy, but in LED. It's him, Dionysus, again, always. But this time, he's traded the leopard skin for vinyl. The thirst is for a mic, and his altar, a DJ booth. You've just stepped into the 21st century, and make no mistake, the god is still very much alive. You thought the rituals ended when Rome fell, when the monasteries burned the old scrolls. When the last vineyard priestess turned her altar into a wine bar, But you were wrong. The god of ecstatic release never needed temples. He needed only bodies willing to surrender. And we're better to find them now than here, in a city that never sleeps, under lights that blink like forgotten stars. Raves, concerts, underground shows. He's in all of them. Wherever the crowd moves in unison, wherever people lose themselves. In rhythm, touch, and sweat. That's him. The ancient madness has gone digital. The wine has turned into shots, tabs, smoke, bass. But the goal is still the same. To unmake yourself beautifully. And don't think for a second, it's just hedonism. It looks like that. Sure, half-dressed strangers. Badas shimmering under strobes, voices shouting nonsense in holy cadence. But scratch the surface, and you'll find ritual. The call and response of a chorus, the costuming of identity, the trance-inducing loops. You'll find a space where hierarchy dissolves and expression reigns. A space where men cry, women roar, and everyone, for a few pulsing hours, becomes something more than human. That's not chaos. That's curated madness. That's Dionysus with Wi-Fi. Let's talk about the modern maenads. You've seen them. Maybe been them. The ones dancing with abandon in combat boots and glitter. The ones who wear masks not to hide, but to amplify. They scream truths into microphones. They weave vines into dyed hair. They howl into subwoofers and kiss whoever. The music tells them to. They don't ask for permission. They don't wait for gods. They are the right. There's a pop star name withheld out of reverence more than secrecy who invokes Dionysus in every show. Not directly, but with lighting cues, with spoken word interludes, with stage sets that resemble ancient groves and pulsing temples. She once told an interviewer, "I don't want to entertain people. I want to possess them for 90 minutes. Her fans? They chant her lyrics like scripture. Her concerts? Described by critics as spiritual disorder in sequins. She laughs when they say that. You know why dot in your sex story? Oh, it's got rhythm. Two strangers at a Berlin warehouse party find each other mid-set. No words, just sweat, shared breath, mirrored movement. The DJ calls it a sacred set designed to guide dancers from euphoria to collapse. Somewhere near hour 4, the strangers lock eyes, then hands, then hips. It's not about lust. It's about recognition. They move together like waves remembering they were once oceans. By sunrise, they're curled on the floor, exhausted, weeping, holding each other like survivors. They never exchange names. But a week later, they both return. Not for each other, for the feeling, for the God. Because the rite isn't about romance. It's about transformation. Now your fringe tidbit straight from the edge of academia. There's a rising school of anthropology that treats music festivals as modern Dionysian rituals. They study everything: group movement, costume dynamics, altered states, community bonding. One paper refers to raves as neurotheological echo chambers. Another calls Coachella a flattened Olympus. There's even a doctoral thesis mapping ancient Bacchic procession routes onto Burning Man's city layout. Conclusion? It's not a coincidence. It's a reawakening. Asterisk because humans never lost the need for ecstasy. We just renamed it. We called it nightlife, clubbing, getting loose, blowing off steam. But deep down, it's still liturgy. Still sacred. Still the God tugging at our ribs, whispering, "Come dance until you disappear." And here's the wildest part. Dionysus doesn't even need music. He's in protest marches that erupt into spontaneous song. He's in drag shows that make strangers cry. He's in viral dance challenges that circle the globe like digital processions. Anywhere identity gets dismantled and rebuilt through performance. He's there, masked, laughing, applauding. You realize it now watching the club dissolve into light and shadow. This isn't nostalgia. This isn't revival. This is continuity. The cult never ended. It adapted. Bacchic became ravers. Priests became performers. The thesis became a selfie stick. And the wildness? It's not a phase. It's a need. You glance at your reflection in a bathroom mirror scratched with lipstick and poetry. Your eyes are dilated. Your smile feral. There's glitter on your collarbone. And a vine-shaped bruise on your thigh. You look like a myth someone forgot to finish. And you love it. Back on the floor, someone starts chanting, not words, just syllables charged with sound. The crowd picks it up. The DJ leans in. The beat shifts, the air tightens. For a moment, everyone moves as one, eyes closed, heads tilted, as if listening to something older than language. And then it hits you. This isn't a party, it's a possession. You're not celebrating Dionysus. You're channeling him. Your limbs are heavy, now not with exhaustion, but with memory. Every fingertip feels like it's carrying centuries. Every breath laced with incense and ozone. You step outside, and the night hits you like a baptism. Cool, chaotic, full of murmurs and neon. Behind you, the warehouse doors close, swallowing. The beat, the lights, the voices. Ahead of you, the world is unchanged and yet completely different. You walk through streets slick with rain and possibility. Past convenience stores glowing like digital oracles. Past graffiti that hums with ritual. Vines curling from alley cracks. Strange eyes watching from brick walls. Slogans that read less like protest and more like prophecy. Feel deeper. Unmask yourself. Joy is the most dangerous spell. And you know who wrote them. Or at least who whispered them into paint. Dionysus walks beside you, barefoot as always. He doesn't speak, he never needs to. He just exists, stretching across every contradiction you've ever tried to hold inside your chest. Masculine and feminine. God and fool. He's in the rain slipping down your collar, in the laughter rising from strangers around a food truck, in the electric buzz of city lights pretending to be stars. He's everywhere, and so are you. Because now, after 20,000 words of myth and madness, dance and divinity, you're not just following his story, you're carrying it. You are, in every modern, messy, mundane moment, continuing the cult. Every time you cry at a song and don't apologize. Every time you laugh too loud in public. Every time you wear something that makes you feel beautiful, ungovernable, and slightly possessed. Every time you kiss someone because you want to, not because you're supposed to. Every time you sit with your grief and let it sing. That's worship. You don't need a thesis anymore. You've got your voice. You don't need a temple. You've got your body. You don't need to be ancient. You just need to be true. And now, as the night folds into silence and your adrenaline begins to fade, you walk slower. The city breathes easier. You're not being chased anymore. You're being carried. Every step echoes with the lives of those who dance this path before you. Maenads, priests, heretics, poets, lovers, artists, and absolute lunatics. You belong to them now. Or rather, you belong to the part of yourself they helped you remember. You belong to the holy chaos. Belong to the divine undoing. And the God, walking beside you, just smiles. Not a goodbye, not even a blessing, just understanding. Because you were never meant to survive this story. Unchanged. You were meant to wake up with dirt on your feet and glitter in your hair. You were meant to tremble at beauty and laugh at power. You were meant to cry, kiss, scream, dance, and then keep going. So you do. And as the sky starts to lighten, as birds begin to yawn into song, as the city wipes its eyes and pretends it wasn't just transformed by a forgotten god in platform shoes, you breathe in. Long. Slow. And you promise. This is not the end. This is the next right beginning. And now, the torches are dim. The music's retreated to the back of your skull, and your limbs are finally starting to go soft. The god is gone, or at least no longer walking beside you. But you know he never leaves. He just changes form. Sometimes a vine curling out of sidewalk concrete. Sometimes they heat in a laugh you weren't expecting. Sometimes just the sound of your own heartbeat when you realize you're not pretending anymore. Let yourself drift. No more masks for now. Just breath and bones. And feeling that something in you got loosened tonight. Not broken, not lost, just unfastened. Like a knot that's been holding your soul too tight finally gave into rhythm. That's how he works, Dionysus. He never screams the truth. He dances it into you slowly, seductively, until you can't remember what life felt like without it. You're safe now, not because the world has changed, but because you have. You've met the god of wine, and he didn't offer peace. He offered perspective, ecstasy with teeth, grief with glitter, and the promise that joy doesn't have to be quiet. So let that settle into your bones. You've wandered. You've danced. You've felt it all. And now you rest. Let the dark cradle you. Let the city go still. Let your heartbeat slow to something soft and secret. The kind of rhythm only gods and dreamers understand. And when you wake, don't rush back to the world of clocks and caution. Just smile. Because Dionysus is still watching, and he loves how you move. End of script. Sweet dreams.